January 9th, 2020, meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order, and if the administrator would call the roll.
Hank Bagelmann.
Here.
Kate Payne.
Here.
Richard Dane.
Here.
Mary French.
Here.
Stephanie Garner.
Here.
Lance Gritters.
Here.
David Huser.
Here.
Kathy Olson.
Here.
Heidi Solheim.
Here.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. You note that the item E1, the public hearing that was scheduled for those two parcels has been pulled for this month. Will be on the, February 6th meeting of the...
Correct, that is the current plan.
Okay. Other than that, I think the agenda is as sent out. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. The agenda is approved. Minutes of the November 7, 2019 meeting have been sent out. Any additions, corrections, comments? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
Move that the minutes of the November 7th, 2019 Planning and Zoning Commission be approved.
Second.
Okay. Do we have a vote yes for approve?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
No for not? Okay, they are approved. We're going to move to public hearing. We skip E1, we go to E2. And Isaac, how about giving us a layout on what we're doing here?
Yes, so if you go on your agenda and click on the current aerial, you'll pull up the two properties that we are looking at. They're both owned by JDM Property Holdings LLC. They are requesting a rezone from R2, which is 1 and 2 family residential, to a PD planned development district. The reason they're asking for this rezone is that they're going to mix densities a little bit. They're planning on putting both twin homes and single family on this property, and then they're also looking to put in some different restrictions and setbacks and other things of that sort. We'll get to that with the next item with the subdivision. We'll get more into that, but so they're asking to go planned development. Staff's recommendation is to recommend approval of the rezoning request.
Okay, hearing that, this is a public hearing. Anyone in the audience who would care to make a comment, you're welcome to. The microphone is to your left. Give your name, tell us where you live, and the microphone's yours.
Good evening. I'm Carl Benning of 1310 Dalton Drive, and I'm here tonight to represent the Waverly Area Veterans Post, which is an adjacent property owner. We are not opposed to the rezoning. We do have some concerns regarding the drainage issues. That is sanitary and storm sewers, as well as surface drainage. We have had some conversations with staff about these issues, but there have been an awful lot of maybes that does not give us a very high degree of comfort. Not that it has anything to do with the rezoning, however, we would like the opportunity to visit with the developer regarding these concerns, as well as the purchase of a very small parcel. Thanks for your time to listen to our concerns.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come up.
I'm the JDM Homes part of it. My name is Steve Carrion. I got a little attachment to this community. I'm not that big out-of-state developer I hear about. My mom lives on the south part of Waverly. My dad is unfortunately buried in St. Mary's Cemetery up the road there. And I graduated from Waverly Shell Rock in 1977. back when we had a pretty good baseball team. But anyway, I live in South Dakota right now, right across the border from Sioux City, Iowa. And I do property development. I've got a construction company. We do some real nice houses and things like that. As far as this project, I'm really excited. Nowadays, obviously, developing is very expensive, and you have choices. And I was looking at different opportunities, different places around South Dakota and my part of Iowa. And when I had an opportunity to put this thing together, I like building really nice places on really picturesque, beautiful landscapes, and this fit the bill what I was trying to do. So the first thing when I had a chance to acquire this, I went and met with the guys up in the city and tried to find out what kind of needs we need around here. And I know housing's big and different type of housing, expensive stuff, reasonable stuff, and there's quite a need. But I was very impressed working with with the whole group there, Bill and Isaac, Mike Cherry. Compared to some communities, very progressive and really wanted to help out and do some stuff. So it's been a very good situation along with my engineers and Isaac here with Reich Survey. So it's been a really good experience, and look forward to helping build this community and do some good stuff here. Thank you.
Anyone else care to speak? Please come up.
Good evening. My name's Greg Gash. I live at 1204 5th Street Northwest. So if you know 5th Street Northwest, it's at the cul-de-sac. I'm the waterfront property immediately to the west of the Veterans Post. And I just wanted to share some observations and ideas with you. I am not opposed to the development here. We've been expecting it for a long time. It's such a beautiful piece of property. One thing to note is, as Carl mentioned, the sanitary sewer should be looked at very carefully, because just using basic logic and looking at the topography, it looks like it all slopes over to the Veterans Post. When the Veterans Post, the current post, was built, I granted the city an easement so that the post didn't have to put in a lift station. And so that easement goes right near my house. And so if there was any construction to go on, it's obviously going to be detrimental to my property. Even if they drilled it, it's still going to be an inconvenience. I'm an engineer by trade. I've been involved with my early life. My mother in the town where I grew up in Minnesota was on the planning commission for years and years, and it included Lake Minnetonka, which is a large lake just west of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so I remember back in the 70s when the first home sold for $100,000. So why would anybody pay $100,000 for a house? And now they're all $3 to $10 million homes there. And she basically got taxed out of it, but that's another story. But so I'm really excited to see the what's the zoning they're calling it, the PD zoning, because I think it fits it well. So I'm excited that, because these lots on the waterfront are going to be definitely primary construction or home sites, without a doubt. In my own opinion, they are too narrow for just living on the water and having a home where you can get around the side of the house to get to the backyard and those kind of things. The other point I wanted to make is the smaller lots there seem awfully small for family type living, because there's not going to be much of a backyard for kids to play in and that kind of thing. The last thing is water safety. With all these new homes coming in, probably folks are going to put boat docks out. The DNR regulations for boat docks allows you to go out extensively into the water by DNR regulations. The city of Waverly does not have any other regulations that change that or overrule that. In my talking with the DNR back 20 years ago when I put my own boat dock out, they said to talk to the city. Back then the city said talk to the DNR. The DNR said no, it's the city's deal, and they were kind of pointing fingers at each other. And at the time I was working with Mike Cherry and the leisure services guy that retired. And there wasn't a lot of regulation around it. And the way the river's been used the 20 years that I've lived here, it really hasn't been needed. But with this coming up, I encourage the city to take a look at that, because if you know the river at all, the center part of the river there is shin deep. The deep part of the river is right along the edge of that south shoreline, adjacent to these lots that are being developed. And so the ski boats that are going by there go by there within maybe 30 feet of the shoreline. I mean, really close. And they come really close to my boat dock, too. And so because the safe passage, the navigable water as far as depth goes, is there on the south shore and on the north shore, I would encourage the city to consider putting in some regulations on boat docks, because you don't need to have a long boat dock to have enough water depth to have your boat there and get in and out of your dock. But if you're allowed to build a dock that meets DNR standards, it's going to be so far potentially out in the water that it's going to be detrimental and really be unsafe to other people that are boating in the area. So those are my points.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just to follow up just a little bit, I know we talked with the city people about the boat situation and the river situation. So when I heard of all that, what that tells me, it must be a good fishing spot. That's where it drops off. So that must be the place to catch them. But we talked about that, so we'll address that. So, I mean, we want to be good neighbors. And I agree, people don't need a 30-foot boat dock when it's steep there. So just to address that, that's something that we've already talked about, and we'll come up with something good there. And then as far as the AMVETs, I look forward to working with you guys too. And I mean, you got a great, beautiful building, and we'll come up with something there too. That's all I got. And I'm always available for questions too. And as we get going, I'll be here quite a bit. And like I said, I'm born and raised in Waverly and love it here. So I got a lot of friends. So if you got any questions or anything else I can do, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing and bring it up here to the commission. Questions, comments?
I have a question just about the planned development. It seems like it's been a little bit since we've talked about one again. Is there a minimum acreage? It seems like I can't remember if we said it was at 10 acres
Well, for a PUD.
for the size. I just wanted to make sure that this meets our code for what a planned development size needed to be at a minimum.
It does meet that. It does meet that minimum, yes.
What is the minimum? It's either 2 or 5, isn't it?
We talk so much about it.
I don't know what the minimum is off the top of my head, but I know that it's something we did check, and it does meet that minimum, yes.
My concern with this property and the development is the loss of so many trees, and the need that the developer is going to have to, restock that area with trees so that we don't lose that many.
What are the plans around that? Is it fundamentally taking out the bulk of those trees along the banks, or what?
Do I need to go up there? Can I speak
Yeah,
there?
You do, because this gets broadcast.
Oh. Where's the camera?
You're on it.
As far as the trees, I don't see any, well, right now it's very unhealthy tree growth. I mean, if you go through there, there's trees, little log pole trees that are going up. They're all fighting for sunshine. It's a very, it's very thick. There's a bunch of them. They're all dying. A lot of them are dying out. So when somebody buys that particular lot, they may be pruning some to make it more healthy. But where the bank is, I mean, that's part of the beauty of it. I mean, you're going to thin some out so it's healthy and so that you can see, but, the majority of those, will stay. When it gets up above, like I said, there's a lot. I just went through with the logging person this afternoon, and there's a lot of ash trees that are diseased, that are dying there. And then there's a lot of, like I said, the other trees it's just a very mature, and healthy growth now. But, the majority of the trees, I mean, it'll be forested. I mean, it's advantage to, obviously, the homeowner and the property to, to maintain, that bank. I mean, that's the, the beauty behind it, so.
Yeah, but lots 4, 5, and 6 are almost 100% fully forested.
Well, yeah, there'll be a lot of trees taken out, to make room for the houses and room for the street. Those would be taken out.
Is there any attempt on your part to add trees back in some of the other areas so that we don't have, we aren't losing a large number of trees?
Well, eventually, as the homeowners build houses, I mean, they'll populate it where it makes sense. But until those houses are built, I mean, it really wouldn't be good to, plant any trees in. It's pretty similar. I live in a neighborhood in Dakota Dunes, South Dakota. It's along a golf course that used to be 3,000 acres of just, it used to be part of the dump and a part, we're between two rivers, so it's a little bit of a, challenge every spring. Maybe you hear about it. But it's the same thing there. I mean, there's a lot of trees, cottonwoods mainly, that are thinned out for the houses. They kept a few where you can. And now 10 or 15 years, I mean, everyone goes in there and plants their street trees and plants their trees. And, it's just like any development, no different than probably on the south side of town. As the trees develop, I mean, it's going to be nicer. But in the meantime, some of the trees are going to be moved so a house can be built.
But you're also going to increase the erosion along the river there if you take out too many of those trees.
Well, if you walk, I mean, right now there's so many. If you go through there, they're like log poles. There's one here, one here. There's no branches on it. They go all the way up. So if you have 3 or 4 trees, I'm no tree biologist, but if you walk a tree person through there, there's going to be culled, they're going to be culled so they're healthy. So instead of in a few years all dying out or to the point where you got just a little bit of canopy, they'll be thinned out so that it makes, sense.
But are there going to be any CNRs such that if they take out 5 healthy trees off their lot, they have to plant 5 additional ones?
Well, I mean, I would take it. I don't foresee forcing anybody to plant trees because, for example, I mean, if you bought a property, I'm not going to tell you. I mean, you're going to try to maintain it the best that you can.
But you're leaving it up to the person buying the property,
Yes.
which is why we are in a climate crisis.
Well, could be, but if you walk through there, you'll find out that there's a tree here. I mean, it's not a healthy growth.
But they're going to be taking down healthy trees as well.
Like, what do you mean, on the bank?
Well, let's take Lot 6, which is almost 100% tree covered.
Okay.
The chances of where they're going to put the house is there will be healthy trees there.
Could be.
Chances are probably pretty good.
Okay.
And so we're losing those trees.
Okay. But there's going to be.
You don't think there's an obligation as a developer to help the climate?
Well, I'm doing my part. I don't know. I mean, that's a big question. So, that depends how detailed you want to get. I mean, if I've got 4 trees here and I build a house here, and those trees go out, and there's trees back here that's already overpopulated, I'm probably not going to replant trees back here. I mean, you're welcome, tell you what, Mary, you're welcome to take a walk through there and you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, as far as little beanpole trees all over the place.
I understand what you're talking about.
Okay,
I don't think you understand my concern.
okay. I'll try it again if you want.
The only thing I would say, 25 years ago, when we did Centennial Oaks out there, we made them do a private drive in order to save all these oak trees. They sold the lots out there, and people, you know, they want them to build, you know, have more space to build, and ended up people took out the trees anyway. You know, I don't like turn around telling people that they have to, you know, to turn around and say they got to plant so many trees. I think that'll happen anyway. And plus, if you have too many of those trees, they aren't used to having grass and everything, and oak trees, and that will die if they don't if they start having grass, because the grass will rob the moisture from those trees. And I don't know how many oak trees, but I know there's some out there,
Yeah.
and they will die off. I know that for a fact because
Yeah.
I've had that trouble on my lot. I know what you're saying, but I think that to turn around and tell people that they have to turn around and plant trees, I think they're going to plant trees anyway, you know. So
But it's done all over the U.S. in
Yeah.
terms of making it a requirement. It's not unique.
yeah. I just don't think that's that's where you and I are going to disagree on. But I think there's the trees that if they get thinned out, they're probably going to be better off in the long run. But when people start planting grass around there, it'll rob the moisture from the trees, and you'll have a bunch of those die off anyway. So.
Yeah, a lot of, like the big trees there, they're already, you know, have a lot of the logs that are already dying out. And the young ones, like I said, if you go there, it's pretty interesting because you'll have a little bit of canopy up here and all there is just one little pole. But, you know, if you thin the right ones and you create, you know, an opportunity for them to, you know, to grow into large trees instead of all fighting. You know, there's a few pine trees that were fighting for their life and they're all dying. But I think down the road, once it gets thinned out and also, like I said, I mean, the people that live there, I mean, it's going to be a nature, you know, environment. And, you know, they like the trees and they like the, you know, being able to see the river. It's a beautiful spot. And they're going to, you know, they're certainly going to maintain it, you know, for the best for their little, you know, for their home.
What about the drainage issues that were of concern to the Waverly Veterans Post? Are those surmountable?
Yeah, we, you know, Matt's the engineer working with Mike Cherry, the engineer, and Isaac, and they're, you know, putting all the, you know, all the numbers together and all of that. I mean, it's actually, you know, with the hills and the way it lays. I mean, Matt, if you're welcome to say anything if you want, but it actually comes together very, you know, very well. I mean, it helps that it's not in the middle of, you know, with homes all around, so it's that part I think is pretty manageable. You want it?
Hi, my name is Matt Schock. I'm with STS Civil. I'm actually based out of Cedar Rapids. I'm from Waterloo originally, so I'm not that far away. To your point, so basically, you know, it's not tonight what happens and then it's a free-for-all. So I have to work with Mike Cherry there, and there's requirements of basically a certain event before anything happened. I have to be able to mimic that, and that's how when you see the basins and other things, stormwater management, I'm controlling the release rate. What's interesting about this is as on some of those more premium lots across the river, there's a nice ridge that's kind of going to be our limiting factor. So everything's going to drain. There's not really we're not really touching that bank, the river's edge there. So all those trees through our subdivision construction are going to be left alone, and basically the water will be draining toward the street and sideways. So basically I can control the water on site, and then basically our plan is off to the west. There's a natural swale. And basically the water will still keep going in the same direction it always has been, but the mechanisms in place to make up for the development for the extra runoff will be basins to store the water and release it. So it's a bunch of engineering stuff that Mike's going to hold me to, that I've got to follow the rules. It's a statewide rules and those kind of regulations. So Mike's going to go over all my calculations, and that'll address your concerns.
So, well, I think one of the things I heard was just a desire on the part of some of those adjoining properties there to work with you.
Yes.
And in communication with you, and I'm just hoping that will be.
No, that's we're gonna need to have those kind of discussions because, to everyone's point, with the basically the eastern half of sanitary would flow a certain direction, and then the western half will rely on some of that routing with the sanitary sewer. So what we are going to do is a gravity sewer. We aren't going to have any lift stations with this current design. So that, to everyone's point, is yes, we're going to have to work with our neighbors there and kind of do the communication. We'll do it directly, but I think the city, working with the staff, we were going to kind of communicate through them. So I'm just not sure all those moving parts, but the communication has to happen and to everyone's satisfaction. I think there's some positives that we have to offer with this project that we can accommodate our neighboring property, or the neighboring property owners. So I'm very mindful of that, and actually, because that is a big detail of were we going to have to do a lift station, or is there a solution that we could rely on gravity, and it's possible to run gravity that way. After looking at it, that was one of the biggest things I had to look at initially here before we went too far ahead. So
There's plenty of volume space available to the west.
for sanitary capacity, well, actually, what's interesting is it's more of an elevation. I have to have a certain amount of cover over my pipes, and in order to get that, you have to run a larger pipe. So the larger pipe is there out of a necessity to stay flatter. But to answer your question, yes, that will give us plenty of capacity for what we're serving, which is just half the lots would be going to the west.
Right, but where you hook into the existing, is that in good enough shape and large enough to be able to handle it?
After initial conversations with Mike Cherry, we haven't had any negative feedback that tying in at that location that the system would have an issue. So that hasn't been any red flag that we've come across in here as we go. And we've got a preliminary design in there. We're going to have Mike review, and we'll be talking back and forth. I think that's a lot of the thing too, is there's a lot that, hey, are we all on the same page that we think this can work before we got too far with the neighbors? But that's going to be a big part of the process too. We've got to explain what's going on there. But the initial first step was kind of, let me take a breath. We're pretty far along for this early in the process. But to your point, it was the sanitary sewer that kind of drove us to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure. So we have a really good shot there, but we'll still have to work with Mike to make sure.
Would the cost of a lift station be prohibitive?
That was outside of my expertise, so I was trying to do everything I could with gravity flow, because that's, that would be the next step, is we would have to, I don't necessarily know if it would or wouldn't, but I'm not familiar. It would have to get another engineer involved with those kind of costs. So from what I know, and I think the gravity flow would be the more economical solution, and I wasn't sure we could do it, but I am now, so.
Thus far, from our end, the zoning standpoint, we have not received any word from Mike about any concerns about this property. Thus far, what's been submitted, obviously, excuse me, there'll have to be some different boxes that Mike will have to check when it comes to this, but thus far, we haven't gotten any red flags from him. So.
Go ahead.
I have a question about the sidewalk decisions. I'm not sure who's going to address that, but the way the sidewalks lay out, they're only on in front of the properties in the inner part of this layout, but not on the outer parts of this layout. Can you talk about that decision?
Yeah, and actually that was a big conversation we have had initially, and that's part of the, so part of this plan development is it gives us a mechanism to kind of not do some traditional things or have an explanation as to why. So to your point there, so basically where the road is going to be set, the grade of the road, there's going to be a nice climb to that initial ridge there that overlooks the river. So in a traditional subdivision setting, you'd have your natural approaches off the driveways off the road, and then you kind of have a leveling for the sidewalk, and then you would go ahead and steepen your. So our thought was if we do kind of a circular internal with, we're offering a 6-foot wide sidewalk for internal flow, and just kind of the uniqueness of the property of we're gonna have longer setbacks for those premium lots on the ridge, so kind of longer driveways. And this will also let us kind of go a little bit more on the steeper side instead of holding an arbitrary sidewalk and then going. It just kind of, it softens the driveway because we do need to climb for elevation because these properties, these houses will sit higher. But to your point, and then and what Mike was concerned about too is we're not foregoing necessarily. We will do the shaping on the other streets on the opposite side of Fawn Hollow and the south side of Red Fox Trail to accommodate a sidewalk. But right now, that Fawn Hollow would be a sidewalk kind of nowhere to the south. If anything would ever expand in the future, the grading will be there to accommodate it. We're just asking for to accommodate those driveways that might be a little bit on the climb to the berm or the ridge on the river. And that was, but the thought was that would be a nice circular, a 6-foot wide, a little bit larger sidewalk than normal, just for that traffic there.
So taking the sidewalk thing one step further, they terminate at Adams Parkway on both Deerfield Circle and Red Fox Trail. But if you want to walk the circle, you have to cross Adams Parkway, go over to the trail, cross again to actually walk the circle. So you're adding 2 pedestrian crossings to get to the trail.
Correct. So not a true circulation, maybe.
I think my point really is about whether or not there's an opportunity to put a sidewalk on the west side of Adams Parkway, really to accommodate the safety of walkers.
I see.
Kids on bikes.
Various kinds of things like that. You're forcing everyone on the outside of this development to cross to the sidewalk, and then all of that traffic that's either bikes or skateboards or pedestrians can't really do the loop. So I know what will happen. They're going to be walking along the west side of Adams Parkway and not crossing, unless they're going to do the river loop. But
well,
I know it's hard to put a sidewalk there. I know what's there.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's potentially a safety concern with that double access to Adams Parkway and no path along it.
Yeah, and I agree, but without there being a system on, maybe if there's a larger project on that, I understand your point.
Well, you're adding a lot of traffic in and out at those 2 points, plus the traffic from Waverly Light and Power and the River Park, and it's already kind of, people are coming 35 off of the bridge. They're supposed to slow, or more. They're supposed to slow down to 25 right past this, right in this general vicinity. I feel like there's the potential for some traffic issues with adding this much traffic and pedestrian traffic trying to cross over to the bike trail.
Is this a comment that can get passed on to Mike Cherry then? Okay.
Might be something to look at. Maybe if we could, once it gets rolling, maybe we could bring the 25 closer to the bridge, to get them to slow down a little bit sooner once we have traffic there. Maybe something to look at.
Let's consider putting the sidewalk in. And as long as we're talking about sidewalks, how about a connection to the school? The kids that are going to be here, they might you need to accommodate them walking to school without going on to Adams Parkway.
Yeah, they're all going to cut through Lot 4.
Yeah, so Lot 4 or Lot 3 or whatever. But there needs to be a connection to the school. And on that same note, Lot 36, is that going to be deeded to the school?
Which ones are you saying?
Is that little tail?
I don't have plans to do that. I think that's, I think is future development that other, parcel depends on what happens down the road. I think that strip there may be helpful for that.
When this was first brought to us, in the initial separation of this into 3 parcels, that lot 36 was going to be deeded to the school.
I thought there was some sort of path issue through there.
Right, well, that's the access now back there, to get back there. That's why it was there, but at that time, they told us that was going to be deeded to the school.
But I don't know anything about it.
Other comments from the commission?
I think that the concept here is real good. I think he's got a good handle for what he's doing. I do think what I heard someone indicate was some concern about docks, and that I don't think is at all handled in any of our codes. And we have talked about long-term planning and recognizing that asset or river is an asset to the entire community. We really probably owe it to the future of the community to have a discussion on docks and water access privately, because there is, where that channel is, we don't want people getting hurt, and I think that makes sense to me, that we visit docks in the future, but I think overall this development's a nice idea.
Thank you, Richard. I agree with what you said there, and I'll work with Bill and the group and we'll come up with something. I'm privy to this conversation, so we'll come up with something that works. I agree 100%. As far as for the community, and people have been voting there, and that's their way to get through. So I definitely think there's a way to accommodate it with number one deal and making sure it flows like it has now. I'm all for that.
There certainly is. It's shallow enough. Someone said ankle or knee deep, but I've seen it ankle deep in the middle there. So that channel really is important to the recreational uses and future access. So great.
I'm interested. I see this drive every day on my way into town and it's always beautiful in the fall. I'll be really curious to see what all the deer are going to do that live there, because if you're going to hit a deer in town in Waverly,
That's the place.
I followed 2 of them today on my way over here. So
I second that.
So I'm actually kind of excited. Now we'll have to watch for children and some of that happening a little bit more there, but it's a beautiful place to build a home and to have a community addition there.
Okay, just for clarification, we've got 2 items on the agenda for this particular property. First one is to take care of the rezoning question, to resolve that, and then we go to looking at a preliminary plat. So some of the discussion is mixed as to how we're going to use the land. We'll clear it up with the motions, but just so you know, we're in both items. Any other comments?
Hey, excuse me, sir. We'll take a look at that sidewalk thing too on the, like you were saying about going around the circle. We'll revisit that and we'll see what we can come up with. But I think that would definitely be good for, I got good ideas.
Isaac, you want to form the motion so we get it right?
So we have the motion to move the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the rezoning request for the properties currently located at 208 9th Avenue Northwest, Waverly, Iowa, and 1005 Adams Parkway, Waverly, Iowa.
Okay, that is the motion. Will someone make it?
I so move.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Let's do a roll call.
Heidi Solheim,
Yes?
Kathy Olson,
Yes.
David Huser,
Yes.
Lance Critters,
Yes.
Stephanie Garner,
Yes.
Mary French,
Yes.
Richard Dane,
Yes.
Kate Payne,
Yes.
Hank Bagelmann.
Yes. The motion is carried unanimously. Let's move now to item F1, which is the preliminary plat of the proposed Whitetail Bluff subdivision. Isaac, if you'll walk us through this one.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, simply because the rezone and preliminary plat for the same property, the conversation's kind of been mixed with these, but preliminary plat, as you can see, there are 36 properties. If you pull up the site plan and then look at the southeast corner of this property, it's lots 32 to 35. That's where the potential for twin homes is being planned to be put in. And then the rest of the property will be single-family homes. So we kind of talked about sidewalks. In a normal R1 zone, they're only required to be put in 4-foot sidewalks. They've decided to put in 6-foot. We also have some different setbacks than usual. Usually in an R1, you see 10-foot side yard. They're proposing 7.5. Excuse me, with the planned development, they're able to kind of play with those setbacks. They have defined that unless they specifically say a regulation is X, Y, or Z, then they're supposed to fall back on the regulations for specific zones. So for lots 32 to 35, that zone is R2. So unless they specifically specify what the regulations for something are, if that's not specified, then it's whatever the R2 zone says. For the rest of the lots, it'll fall on R1 zoning. So again, if they don't specify specifically what regulations for something are, it's whatever the R1 zoning says. So staff's recommendation is to approve the preliminary plat for the proposed Whitetail Bluff subdivision to the city council, contingent upon rezoning of the current properties. We put that contingency on because obviously if it's not rezoned, then there's some changings that need to happen to this preliminary plat.
What is the width of the street? Is there parking on both sides?
There will be parking on one side. I believe it's
60 foot?
29 feet and then 60-foot right-of-ways. Yes.
Okay, this is not a public hearing. However, if there are questions that anyone has, we're happy to hear them. And if the council has, or the commission has any questions, obviously, you know how to do your job. So let's have some discussion on this.
How do the new streets line up with the Waverly Utilities entrances and exit? Are they,
You can
isn't it
kind
right
of
across?
see it a little bit. There's cuts in the,
Okay, I see that.
The one
so the
lights
north
up.
one is problem, maybe.
Yeah.
Lots, is it that they're proposing 7.5-foot side yards?
For the 7.5, I believe the 7.5 is for lots 1 through 3 and 16 through 31. So it's the lots that will be used for single-family use. And then if you go to the third page of the preliminary plat in the lower left-hand corner, I know it's kind of small and a little hard to read, but it does kind of lay out some of those setbacks and restrictions that they're proposing to put in use, and then it lays out what lots those regulations will run with.
My eyeballs.
Other comments?
If we approve this preliminary plat, but we have made some comments and recommendations, does this mean that those don't happen? Or does it mean that you'll be working with them to see some of that is incorporated?
Yep, so we'll continue to work with them and try to nail down some different things that have been brought up in this meeting tonight. They will be required to submit a final plat, and then that final plat is what they will ultimately be held to once they start constructing. So, and then with the plan development, our code lays out that if they decide that they want to change the final plat that's been approved, they have to come back through this board and get approval for that before they can do that. So it gives a little bit more oversight before they can just change things. So,
Greg, you had something to add?
Greg Gash, 1204 5th Street again. Two comments. One, Mary, about your concern about trees. I would encourage you to check out Orono, Minnesota, and they've got all sorts of tree regulations for their waterfront properties on which ones you can take down and how you replace it and that kind of stuff. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's something you could look at. It's ORONO, Minnesota. And then the other thing was, looking at the way this is developed, think of how many kids are going to be in this neighborhood, and they're all going to go to Cary School. And like was mentioned before, maybe at the south edge of that cul-de-sac, you got a sidewalk going over to the school property. Otherwise, the kids are going to end up, walking across private property, and that's not going to make good neighbors. So, thanks.
Other comments from the commission? Pam, did you want to speak?
Yes.
Come on up.
Hi, my name's Lori O'Hare. I'm born and raised in Waverly, actually grew up on 100 9th Avenue Northwest. I now live at 84 9th Avenue Northwest, so this is my backyard. We knew when we bought the house last year this was going to happen someday. We thought it was going to happen when I was a kid. My concern is, what I'm seeing is the size of the property and how many lots we're trying to squeeze into it. I just feel like we're trying to overdevelop the area. I don't feel like it should have that many homes. I don't think that's going to be desirable. I know in our last home, there was something that came up for us that talked about you could only have so many square foot of structure per the lot. I'm wondering if this fits what that would be for other homes. I have no idea, but I just know most homes aren't 1,000 square foot homes anymore, and I'm thinking it's going to be house to house and no yard. I also think that they're having a street where you can park on one side and not the other is going to be problematic, especially if you are trying to attract families in this neighborhood. So it doesn't affect me directly because it's my backyard, but I'm here tonight because I've heard all kinds of rumors and there's been some concerns on traffic and what it's all going to entail. So those are my concerns for what it's worth.
Thank you. From the commission, anything?
Isaac, the normal R1 is 10-foot side lots.
correct.
I see nothing here that dictates that we need 7.5-foot side lots. Realistically, if we've got to pick up an extra 2.5 foot per lot, we may have to sacrifice one lot. I think that we have too many problems when we shrunk to a 10-foot side lot. There's trouble getting in and out with trucks. There's I think a great deal of negative that goes along with too small a lot when one house is on top of the other. We are blessed here to not be forced to do that type of development, and I really think we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot I don't think that even though it's a planned development that we should alter that 10-foot side lots. I think we have to stay there. So I couldn't support it with that. I'd like it to be reevaluated.
I guess just some history on the 7.5 foot, and the reason for keeping it is the underlying, what it's currently zoned right now is R2, and R2 is the 7.5 foot side. I don't disagree or have an opinion one way or the other, but that's the underlying, it's already zoned R2, and the 7.5 foot is based on that. So that's part of the PD, the mix and mash of the R1 and the R2 is some of these setbacks, and typically an 80-foot wide lot or a 75-foot wide lot that we're showing is a lot that's wide enough for a 3-stall garage. In my experience, I think what's different about these lots and the acreage total that might be of concern is that the depth isn't quite as traditional. But I know for a fact that 80-foot lots would be, it's not, I'm not sure, Isaac, you can correct me, if R2 would be a 60-foot lot or what is the base width, but our lots here are 80 and 75. Is it 65? Okay. So that's kind of where we're trying to balance that and why we kind of invoke this PD is because it's already zoned R2, but for Steve's protection, he wants kind of this nicer R1 feel for some lots here, and not that R2 isn't nice, but I'm just saying that the background is the 7.5 foot comes from the R2 in the zoning. And that's all. Just to follow up on that.
And that, I also, where I live in the Dakota Dunes area, there's 3 different, distinct neighborhoods of different, style houses and stuff. And one of them that's called the Prairie, and it's one that I developed quite a few houses in. I didn't do the development, then American Energy did. And a lot of those lots are the 80-foot, and actually they have 7-foot setbacks in order to get enough houses. I mean, everything's so darn expensive now, and people we're trying to, build houses, some of them that, more people can afford. And I know in that neighborhood there that I kind of patterned this off of is, we've got 7 foot, and it's pretty, very, very nice, neighborhood. Like Matt was saying, the R2 was 7.5, so we weren't trying to change nothing there. In order to get the 3-car garage, it really does fit in very nice.
I think as it was said earlier, there's going to be young families in that center section. In order to keep that house price down, I think we got to look at that. I mean, otherwise your house price goes up and you aren't going to have those young families going in there.
I think that it speaks to a move toward density, which I think is positive. I think it makes it feel like you're neighborly. I mean, I think that actually up where I live, the houses are really probably 10 feet from the property, actually, and I think it's kind of nice. So I'm not sure that we have to continue to build, taking more and more land and have the density be less. I think that pushing toward density is a positive thing.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the preliminary plat for the proposed White Bluff subdivision to the City Council contingent upon the rezoning of we already did the rezoning. It still has to go through council. Rezoning of the current properties.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Isaac, we need to do another roll call.
All right. Heidi Solheim,
Yes?
Kathy Olson,
Yes.
David Huser,
Yes.
Lance Girders,
Yes.
Stephanie Garner,
Yes.
Mary French,
Yes.
Richard Dane,
No, due to setback concerns.
Kay Payne,
Yes.
Hank Bagelmann.
Yes. Motion is carried. And I think that'll conclude this one. Let's take a look at any old business. We have one item on the agenda, and that's just a reminder that this is the beginning of the comprehensive planning process. Lance and I have had, Lance, yeah, I did it again, didn't I? Isaac and I have had some comment about this, and we'll start to lay out a scheduling so that over the next couple of years, we can get a fresh comp plan developed. Any comments on any of that?
When do you intend to start? I'm just curious. Have you got some
Probably early summer
of this of 2020?
of 2020, yeah.
Okay.
We've got to take a look at getting the money put together in order to pay for the various things. So we haven't defined the scope of it yet, and we need to do that as a commission. Okay,
Yeah, I remember I've been through 3 of them, so
welcome.
I just wanted to know when we were going to, I know how much time it takes. So.
Yep. Any new business? Your motion to adjourn?
Can I make just one note? Due to the rezoning applications that were withdrawn for today, I'd like to make sure that we all try to make a presence to the neighborhood meeting and be able to hear maybe firsthand some of the residents' concerns, or that Isaac will send out the date and time if anyone's interested.
Garrett mentioned those, and Isaac, if you'd be kind enough to just throw out a refresher memo on that.
Yep, I will.
Thank you. Anything else?
I move Planning and Zoning Commission meeting be adjourned.
We are adjourned.